Our guest today is a longtime friend of Kenny's who has distinguished herself as a television director. Beth McCarthy-Miller directed Saturday Night Live for, I believe, 11 years. She's been nominated, if Wikipedia is up to date, 10 times for a Primetime Emmy Award. She's directed too many TV shows to mention, but I am going to mention some of them. There's Veep, 30 Rock, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Community, Californication, Modern Family, The Good Place, The Kominsky Method. You get it. It goes on and on. So why don't we just bring out Beth McCarthy-Miller?
Come on out, Beth
McCarthy-Miller. Look at that state-of-the-art microphone.
Hi. Let me get
I know.
Beth,
when we went on COVID, we got these mics for table reads, and it's pretty fancy.
Oh, really?
I did not purchase this.
Kenny, you were saying?
No, she got nominated for 10 Emmys.
10 Emmys?
Yes. Beth, did you win any of them?
Oh,
always
no,
a bridesmaid?
I am the Susan Lucci of the Primetime Emmy. I am always a bridesmaid, never a bride. I've won DGA awards, never an Emmy. And I used to go, I'm the youngest of 9. And when I started getting nominated for Saturday Night Live, my whole family would come out, like spouses. So there'd be like 35 people at a hotel. We'd go to the Emmys. We'd be on the red carpet. I'd have siblings embarrassing me because they'd start talking to some celebrity and being like, oh, you know my sister Beth? She's nominated. And I would lose every time. So I just stopped going.
You know what? They're gonna have to at one point give you one of life achievement things.
No, they don't have to do any of that.
I know it's a cliche, but you were nominated. The closest I ever got to the Emmys is I got to sit once.
Yeah.
I was a seater, one of those people.
You were a seat filler?
I was a seat filler.
Nice.
This was after I was on SNL.
Yeah.
I went to becoming a seat filler, but
at least your agent got you something, Gary.
Exactly.
Well, I got to the award show. So, hey, let's start with you and Kenny.
Okay.
From what I understand,
Kenny was my first boss.
Yeah. Go into that. What's Kenny like as a boss?
So I got a job working at MTV. I got an internship for the summer, and then after it there was a job open up at the studio, and I got the job as being the line producer's assistant, which was this guy Alan Newman. And Alan Newman worked for Kenny, who was the vice president of the department. So at the time, MTV was like a factory. We would shoot all day and night, 5 days a week, because we'd have to do 7 days of programming. So anytime you saw a VJ on camera, we were shooting all that at the studio. So I was Alan's assistant, and I would fill in. MTV was literally a Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney movie, wasn't it, Ken? It was like, my mom has some costumes. My dad has a barn.
We had no budget.
Here's an old piece of wood.
It was always no budget. There's no money.
No money. So I think I was making $14,000 a year. I think I was making a little bit of overtime. And if like the control room PA called out sick, I would be the control room PA. And if I would just fill in and do stuff along with, doing all the stuff that I did for Alan. And then my boss went on this trip called Amuck in America. They went on the road. It was like the beginning of that kind of reality television stuff. And I'm sorry, I'm turning off my mail because it's noises and annoying me. And so Alan was gone. So I was in the studio, and Kenny would call me and yell at me when like things got on the air that weren't supposed to go on the air. And I'm like, you're aware I make $14,000 a year and I'm being made responsible for what gets on the air.
Well, that's what somebody was yelling at. That's what somebody was yelling at me.
Yes.
Okay.
You have to understand, there was somebody right behind me.
Yes.
Look, I've known Kenny for a long time. I think like 30 years.
Yeah.
I've never heard that side of Kenny before. So he was
I don't
kind
know
of an
if I
asshole.
yelled.
Were you kind of an asshole?
I think I probably sounded like I was whining.
No, he was.
What's going on?
But the thing that was so funny about it was MTV. It was like the line producer's assistant was becoming responsible 6 months after she had the job of what was getting on the air. But that was the beauty of that place. I started directing when I was 25.
Well, let's get to that because, that's the big move, is moving into the director's chair.
And that is a great story because I took jobs to make more money. I had no career path at MTV, except for I knew I wanted to be in television and I loved music. And it was a perfect
Kenny was an
combination.
asshole.
No, Kenny was a good boss. Stop
All
it.
right.
But I'm making fun of him because I was literally, the assistant and going, I'm sorry that information got on wrong. I'll fix it. But anyway, so I just took whatever job. So they trained me to be an AD and it was a little more money. And I waitressed on the weekends and I worked at the Gap at Christmas time. So I would get a discount so I could buy Christmas gifts for my 450 family members. And I was going to there was associate producer jobs and director jobs. So when you became an AP, you got like a big promotion, you got more money and you worked with the talent on the floor. So a job opened up and I was going to take it. And the directors that I worked for at the time, Scott Fishman and Milton Lage, they pull me aside and they're like, please don't take this job. And I'm like, it's more money. I'm taking the job. And they had the foresight of saying, I think you're skilled in this direction. I think you should become a director. A job will open up in the next 6 months if you sit tight. And this is the path you should take. And this is a skill that you can take somewhere else, where some of the other jobs at MTV, they didn't really translate in the real world. And that was the best advice I ever took. And
I am curious about this. Were you aware? I was not aware that you're moving into the director's seat was somewhat of a pioneering thing, because there really weren't that many women directors. Did it even occur to you? It didn't really occur to you then.
No, it was Peggy Polito.
Peggy Polito. Very good. Yes.
From Pittsburgh, PA.
Yeah. And that was something that MTV did that was kind of progressive, because the truth of the matter was, I didn't know any. I knew one person who, I think Arsenio Hall, Sandy Fullerton. I don't know if you remember Sandy. That was the only woman director I knew who was a control room director. Yeah, I hadn't really thought that it wasn't there.
Let me ask a question, because if I'm a viewer or listener, I'm asking this question. So you talk about that career path. Was it simply experience from observation and the other jobs that, when a directing job became available, you would be considered, or were you required to take some sort of class?
No. So as an associate director, when you're at MTV, you're doing that job almost 5 days a week. And you think about other directors that do sit in a control room. They maybe direct once a week, once every 2 weeks. You're in the director's chair 3 to 5 days a week. So you either get better at it, or you should find something else to do.
Or you work for Kenny.
But as an associate director, they would bring in fill-in directors. And lots of times you're basically directing from the AD chair. And my bosses were noticing that I had the skill level, and I was basically directing for the director that was being hired for the day. And that's when they kind of thought, you should really go in this direction, and they guide you along the way. I mean, they were both very talented directors, and I always, sought advice from them. And the good thing about MTV is when you first start directing, you're doing really simple, easy stuff. So you can just work on your skills. And as you get better, there's more involved shows. And I started at MTV kind of at the really golden time. It was right when they started making their own programming. So remote control was being made. And it was like, do you know how to AD a game show? It's like, no, it's like, figure it out. So, it was that kind of experience where we started making shows, and I got experiences that I never would have gotten anywhere else.
Well, what's curious, and I think back on that, is that it worked out great that we had given everybody the opportunity. But a big reason is because we were all non-union.
Yeah.
To go out and find somebody who had experience in those roles would have mean DGA.
Yep.
And all these people. And so what happened is we were giving kids the opportunity, and I was a kid too, the opportunity to do these things, but as kind of but just don't join the union.
Yeah. It was like going to graduate school and making a tiny bit of money, but it was greatest thing in the world because, and Kenny, I think about that because I know before I got there was that big decision on whether to go union or not. And at the time, the DGA has a lot more things in place for, low budget things and cable, but at the time they didn't. And I think MTV probably would have gone out of business.
Well,
this
at that
path still
point, I
exist?
think so. I think so.
Does this path exist anymore then? I'm basically hearing
This path, I
there
don't
was a
think
time in
exists many places. Maybe, I don't know what HTGTV and Food Network, if they're all union or not, but it is a path that unfortunately isn't around for a lot of people anymore. It's a very difficult thing to become a director.
Yeah, that's a big question, is how do you move into that chair? And the thing that was really wonderful for a lot of people there, I mean, there are a lot of directors, who have spawned from MTV who have gone on to become great directors. Glenn Weiss, I remember, was one of them. There was a bunch of people.
Mark Pellington, Peter Lauer.
Exactly. Oh, Pellington. Yes, exactly.
Demi. I mean,
exactly.
It's nuts.
Right. There are. But they had the opportunity to explore all these different genres. I think you went into remote control, game show. Then from game show, did you do the talk show with?
I did like, when Milt left, I kind of became the senior director. So I did all the big music shows. I launched Unplugged and did half of that series. I started doing pilots. I didn't do the pilot, but I did several episodes of the Ben Stiller Show, which was the MTV show before he got the Fox show. That was when MTV still made you put videos in the programming at some point.
Right. They were all just wrap-ons. But here's the thing, she's doing genres that she's never done before as the director. Traditionally, you go, oh, well, we're going to do a music show. We're going to do Unplugged. Let's find somebody who has music experience. Right. But at MTV, it was like, who's our directors? She's a senior director. You're going to direct this
and
music.
Any given day, you were doing a news show. We'd have like a show like The Week in Rock. We'd have music performances. We'd do comedy things. I started doing comedy on MTV. I did a half-hour comedy hour with Carol Donovan, and then, I started getting asked to do the pilots on the show, and I did the pilot for a late night talk show with Jon Stewart. And that is the show that, we launched on MTV, and then it got syndicated by Paramount to replace the Arsenio Hall show. And that's what I left MTV for. And that was my first job in the DGA.
So, all right. Is this a quantum leap then to say, okay, how do we go from this to Saturday Night Live? Is there something we need to talk about in between here?
It's not scary. So I'm doing the Jon Stewart show in syndication, but like I did at MTV, it's the little engine that could. You did a lot of things like on the late night talk shows. Now they hire a director to do all the single camera comedy pieces. And then there's a director that directs the show. Well, I did everything because we had no money and, it was the little engine that could. So I was doing the Jon Stewart show. It was one of my favorite, 3 years of my life. And I left MTV. It was a very hard decision. I don't know why. I guess I was very attached to MTV. It's one of those places that when you're there, it's so connective, and all of my close friends were there. It was very hard to leave the company. But I left the company to do that show in syndication, and it got canceled 9 months later.
Yeah, I remember.
So I'm now in New York in the DGA, first job in the DGA. No connections at all. Can't go back to MTV. And my show gets canceled. There's nothing going on in New York.
Wow.
No, give me a year. Give me a year. Give me a year.
1994 to 95 was when I did Jon Stewart.
Okay.
So it's the spring of 1995. I have no job, about to have no job, because they flew us out to California to tell us they were canceling us, but we were on a 2-week hiatus, and they're like, "Oh, by the way, you have to do 2 more weeks of shows to finish."
Knowing you're canceled.
Out. Yes.
Oh,
and there's a critic that's in New York, and his name is Joseph Adalian, and he hated John. I don't know why, but he didn't. And John this is like one of the funniest human beings I've ever been in a room with.
And smartest.
And so brilliantly talented and smart. I'm sure he's eating his words now, but he literally had a column in the New York Post or whatever paper he wrote for, Countdown to Cancellation. And he would talk about our show every night as it was being canceled.
Boy, he had a vendetta.
He really didn't like us very much.
What purpose? Yeah. Wow.
Had a thing about John.
So that summer's kind of tough.
No, but what happens is the week the show gets canceled, I get a call from Robert Morton. Hal Gurney had from Morty. Hal Gurney had just left Letterman, and Jerry Foley was just starting to direct it. And I get a call from Lorne Michaels' office. I had Keith Raywood, who's one of the set designers on the show, had done a bunch of sets for MTV shows. And I'd just done this Eagles Hell Freezes Over, when the Eagles reunited after 14 years. And Keith did the set for it. So Keith told Lorne about me because Davey was retiring because they wouldn't let him smoke in the control room.
Is that why? I knew Davey quite well. And yes, it was a smoker's den.
Loved that man so much. He was
him.
So kind and so wonderful to me. I think he was like, it was time, but also they were making 30 Rock a smoke-free building. And he's like, this is the perfect time. So I got calls from both those shows, and it's like, oh my God, the only two shows in New York that would be, the next step for me, and I would love it. So I met with both of them, and originally they were going to have John, who's the director that directs Kids in the Hall and did Second City.
Oh, not Schneider. No,
I'm going to tell you in a second. But anyway, they were going to have him direct Saturday Night Live, but he didn't want to do the music. So they were going to hire me just to do update music. And Spade was about to do this thing called Spade in America. It was going to be this like segment. So I started interviewing for that job too. And I kind of felt like that was kind of the next thing for me instead of doing another talk show at the time. And I started interviewing for it, and they kept asking for more comedy. I'm like, why do they want to see the sketches I've shot? I'm only doing this. And they're like, oh no, they're thinking about you for the whole show now. And that's when I started having daily panic attacks. And, I met with Lorne, and he was lovely and wonderful to me. And Steve Higgins, who was the head writer on the Jon Stewart Show, had just gotten hired there as well. And a couple other writers. And that was the year where they got rid of everybody. Right. That was that last,
year
after the Farley, Janine Garofalo, that
right.
Whole. Right. So,
now, did you break new ground there, being the first woman director for?
It was the first woman director. Yeah. I mean, it was Davey and Paul Miller did 2 seasons. So right. I was the third director there.
Right.
Yeah,
and I was also like this cable weasel, and I was, everyone that, Gary, everyone had been at Saturday Night Live pretty much since the first show. And then there was me.
Right. Since your show of shows.
Well, I will say, I mentioned this to Gary, that I used to, when I had a direct a live event show, I would get so nervous.
Yeah.
And Gary would say to me, "Oh, you never look nervous." I'd be,
yeah.
I was so. How was the first night that you directed? What was that like?
Super fun story, Ken, because the first week was Mariel Hemingway hosted, and she was known for breaking kind of barriers. She was the woman that kissed Roseanne on TV. And she's the woman that she was in that movie Personal Best, where she kind of had a female on female relationship. So one of the writers wrote a monologue where they were introducing pretty much all new cast, except for Timmy Meadows, Norm Macdonald, David Spade. And I think Mark McKinney was there for like 3 shows before the end of the season. So they wrote a monologue where she walked around the studio and introduced herself to all the new cast. And she kind of like brushed the guys aside, and they were all like, oh, Mariel Hemingway. And she was like really into all the women. And she comes into the control room. They write a beat where she comes into the control room.
Oh, no, this is the first episode?
Yeah. Flat out kisses me on the lips.
Oh, my God.
And then leaves.
I remember this.
Yeah. So I'm directing.
I'm just now putting it together that it was you.
Yeah. Never have I ever seen Saturday Night Live in person. Never have I ever seen it directed in person. Davey retired.
Wow.
I got hired. Davey was lovely to come and hang out with me the first couple of weeks, but I am literally shitting my pants.
Oh,
and now I have to worry about being on camera, which I hate, and being kissed by Mariel Hemingway.
Wow.
And so
how was that?
I can't imagine when you first read that
script. She's a really
script.
good kisser, guys. She's a good kisser. But it was a long path. And Lauren's like, okay, we need to cut it down. I'm like, I think we could just not go in the control room. He's like, no, I want to go in the control room. And then we do it again. He's like, nah, I think the path is still too long. And I'm like, hey, how about we don't go to the control and we do this? And he's like, no, we'll go to the control room. We rehearse it again on Friday night. And I'm like, hey, I got an idea. Let's not. And before I could get it out, he's like, we're going in the control room.
Well, wow, that must have been some
But
night.
the worst part about it is my mother, who never knew what I did for a living. And every time I got a new job, she's like, am I going to see you? And I'm like, no, you're not going to see me. Right. I'm in the control room. I'm like behind the camera. So I tell her, no, you're not going to see me. And then the next morning, it's like, I saw you. Said I wasn't going to see you. Yeah. Good times.
Now, look, I keep mentioning when I was there, blah, blah, blah.
Please.
But previously it was a boys' club, the writers, it was a boys' club when I was there. Of course, there were breakout women. I worked with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, for God's sake. So have you. So obviously the talent was always there, but it was always a male-dominated show. It still was probably when you got there. So here you are, Maverick again. Did you ever have to navigate difficult waters? Due to, is that an obvious question?
That show, to tell you about that show, I was sick to my stomach every day going to work, to my stomach, the first, however many months. And, the way it worked was they hired me through December and they would pick up my contract for the rest of the year after December. And when my agent called me and told me they picked up my contract, I cried. I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. I mean, it was a bunch of guys that have been there forever. I'm clearly the wrench being thrown into a very dysfunctional but well-oiled machine. And there were people that were super mean to me, and I had to kind of, manage them. But the good news is almost the whole cast was new. I knew Norm and Dave from Stand Up, David, and Mark McKinney is a love, and Tim Meadows is the sweetest man on the planet. So everybody else had never been on television before. It was Will Ferrell, Sherry O'Terry, Molly Shannon.
Had Kristen Wiig started yet? No,
Kristen
was
did
later.
Start. That was later. Kristen was there for my last 2 seasons, but it was Sherry and Molly, Nancy Walls, who was Steve Carell's wife, Keckner, Jim Brewer, and then, soon after it was like Chris Kattan and Anna Gasteyer got hired, and then on. And the show, and a lot of the writers were new, and I knew Steve Higgins really well, and I knew Dennis McNicholas and Andrew Steele, and those were all guys that I had been working with for years. So that connectivity was there and awesome.
Well, Andrew Steele was the head writer on a pilot that I did with the Higgins boys.
Higgins boys and Gruber.
Gruber.
But it didn't go. But just throw that in.
I love them.
Yeah.
I love them all.
Yeah, no, they're great.
Iowa boys.
So just before we move on from Saturday Night Live, because there's a bunch of other stuff. Yeah. Is there anything else like the story from SNL that you always tell that is like that one night that went horrible or went terrific or was just memorable to you?
There's so many. There's so many. Like, you have that moment, you're like scared shitless for like 6 or 8 months, and then you're walking the hallways on the 17th floor, and all the cast photos are up, and then all the pictures of like the famous sketches are up, and then you're like, holy shit! Like, who did I?
That's terrific that you take that moment.
You totally, and you have that moment more than once, and then somebody hosts, and you're like, oh my God, or you're in,
Okay, is there any one host that stands out in a good way or a bad way?
There's so many of them that are amazing. I mean, Alec was always amazing. John Goodman was always amazing. Tom Hanks is always amazing. I loved working with Jerry and Julia, and the people that went.
But fortunately, you didn't have Robert Blake.
I didn't have Robert Blake, and I didn't have Steven Seagal.
Okay.
Oh, you poor thing. Yeah, Robert Blake wiped his ass with a script that I wrote.
That is nice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I didn't care at all, but it comes up all the time online. People say, "Are you hurt?" I didn't care. I have just one more SNL question. Because it really.
I have one more after your one more, which would be
good. It was a long time. I get your question.
It's a who's who of people in comedy and beyond. But Will Ferrell to me will always be the standout comedian who carved a niche like no other human being. Could you tell from the beginning? Because he just started with you.
I will tell you that when I first got there, because the cast was hired before I got hired. And, I was in the offices for a couple of weeks before the season started. And everyone's like making jokes and Will was pretty quiet. And I was like, I wonder why this guy got hired. And then you went to the first table read and you were like, oh my God.
That's why.
And the thing that's great about Will is he's hilariously funny in person. He's one of the funniest people I know, but he isn't always on. Like he's not always trying to do a bit. And the other thing about Will that a lot of people don't know is he's such a great writer, because he would write a couple sketches by himself and then they would just come up at the table read. Like he wrote Cowbell by himself.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
So, yeah. He wrote this hilarious sketch after watching the movie The Ice Storm, where people are sitting and eating and they're just making a lot of noise with their plates. And then they're talking and asking questions. And then he just starts screaming at the table. And it's one of the funniest sketches. He just makes me laugh so hard. At the amount of people that have come through my life that I've had a front row seat of watching their comedic genius is just ridiculous. I mean, between Will and Sherry and Molly.
And Kristen Wiig is another for me.
Kristen
it's just sublime. It's
Tina Fey,
on another plane.
And when I left SNL, I left because it was time to go. 11 years is hard. It's a hard show to do. It's taxing on your being as a whole. And I had a son who was very young and I was up all day and up all night. And I'm like, I am not going to live much longer if I stay working here. So, I had to go. So when I started doing half hours, the first year was rough. It was, I made half my salary. I went to like events at the DJ in New York to like meet the showrunners and try to, and all the directors there that were all looking for work. They're like, you left a full-time job in New York? Why? And I'm like, and
seemed like the right thing to do at the time.
And God bless Tina Fey, because Tina and I always had a really great working relationship. And she, by the way, is one of the most genius human beings.
Also sublime, yeah.
And also one of the loveliest human beings. Like I have had that combo more often than not.
Wow.
Which is an absolute miracle, that not only are they unbelievably brilliantly talented, they're also some of the finest human beings I've met as well. And, I would sit across from them and have a meal with them tomorrow and have the best time of my life. Tina and I worked together really, really well. And she gave me an episode of 30 Rock. And it was this episode called The Rural Juror. It was the first season. And just happened that when it aired, an article came out about how 30 Rock was finding its legs. And really, it was when the critics were really going nuts about it. And an article was like, right around The Rural Juror. And then all bets were off. I got lots of jobs after that.
Fantastic. Yeah. Now here's my question. Was that your first single camera half hour?
No, I had done a couple other shows.
Yeah.
And then
didn't you find it interesting? And for me, coming from multi-camera too, and then when I did I did Even Stevens, which was single camera, but there was so much hesitance from them to hire me because it would always be like, you do multi-camera, you don't know single camera. And then once I did single camera, I was like, this is fantastic. There's only one camera. And every time I would do a different setup, the lighting guy would say, hey, I need another half hour.
Yeah.
And I get a break.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, the funny thing I found when I was, and I'm sure you found it too, when I started doing single camera is, there was a prop that needed to be to happen. And people were like, oh my God, we got to get it. I'm like, it's a 30-minute turnaround. Like try to get that prop in 18 seconds. Right, Gary?
Yeah.
Like how many times they're counting down to SNL back on the air, and I see a couch coming in and the cast on the side and them jumping on and 2, 1, and up,
and a bald cap being removed.
And that was one of the greatest things that Saturday Night Live taught me.
Yes, it was.
You asked me a question when we were talking before. I thought it was a good question to ask.
What? I had a question?
To me, you said, the thing that non-directors want to know.
Oh yeah. Okay. I'm a non-director because you guys could talk shop forever and it's interesting, of course. But I'm less interested in your blocking procedure or one camera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm always interested in the resilience or the thought process when things go wrong. Like when the writer writes a script one way, you set it up and the DP says, you can't shoot it that way. And you've got to make decisions on the fly. Do you have stories like that where you?
Well, I mean, Saturday Night Live was the greatest experience for that. And that's why I'm good at that now, is because, those meetings happen at 10:45 at night, 11 o'clock at night, and we go on the air at 11:30. And there were times where, I had to completely reblock a sketch, or I'm in a commercial break and they've taken one of my scripts out and cut like 5 different lines out of the script, including like the line that the actor was crossing to the door on, or, a camera was in a different movie. Yeah. So, I mean, I had to learn how to, I'd be in the meeting at 10:45 and they'd like, oh, we want to pull this up. And I'm like, okay, but he's over here. And then he's over here for this. And they're like, okay, well, what can we do? And I started kind of having to edit in my head. So, Saturday Night Live gave me that skill, and I don't take it for granted, because I have watched other directors that aren't used to that kind of, oh my God, this is falling apart, we have to fix it. I think it's a very difficult skill, and I got thrown into the fire for it, but it's a very valuable skill.
I compare everything, as Kenny knows, to the Beatles. So SNL was your Hamburg.
Yeah.
Right. It was 8 hours a day doing bennies and things to stay. Well, I know you weren't doing bennies, but it was figuring things out on the fly in real time.
Yes.
And fixing them in real time, because with that experience, the rest of the world gets a lot easier, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, I do not sweat almost anything on a single camera set at this point.
That's awesome.
Because
that's cool.
I had 30 minutes to fix it, so I don't have 18 seconds.
Well, your list of shows, what Veep and Community and the Kaminsky Method. I mean, that's the creme de la creme. It's like the pick of the litter.
I am the luckiest, knock on wood, human being on the planet. I mean, when I look at my IMDb page, I'm like, there's not many stinkers in there. And look, you have to take work and you have to get experience and you have to do shows. But I have been so blessed, whether it was, Parks and Rec and The Good Place. Michael Schur was a writer on SNL and he hired me, Tina at 30 Rock.
David Mandel, of course, who's done our show.
But you know what? I didn't know Dave. You know how I met Dave was he came as a writer when when Jerry hosted SNL. So that's the first time I met Dave. He wasn't a writer when I was there. I think like the only leftovers when I was there were like Tim Herlihy and Steve Coren, and I don't even know if they were around.
Well, there must be something to your success. If you had to, like disposition, I know a lot of directors, some directors, they're very, aggressive on as far as working with the cameras and budget wise. And they're like, I've also been on shows where all they care about is moving fast, moving fast, where it was, it's just that's the only thing, so that they'll hire a director based on, he always gets us out on time. Or this director is good because maybe they like to hire actors because they think there's a
connection to the other
connection to the actors. So there must be something that you would have to say, I do that I bring to the party.
I will say probably some of the skills, well, you know how they say everything you learned in kindergarten. I grew up in a house. I'm the youngest of 9.
Catholic?
A lot of, Irish Catholic. A lot of strong personalities. Every single person in my family is, an established professional or has, gone more than college degree, which I'm the dumbest person in my family. I only have.
I'm the dumbest in mine.
Yeah. I knew I loved you, Gary. But I had to manage a lot of personalities, I guess, from when I was little. And I think that really is successful for me on set. And the other thing about comedy as opposed to drama is comedy is a group effort. It's always a group effort. I think even when you're a director and it's your episode and it's episodic, first of all, you always have to make the show look like the show. You can't, have it be so different that it doesn't feel like the show. And, anybody has a good idea. Anybody can make something funnier. And I've always been open to that. And maybe that's why people like to work with me, because it's not my way or the highway. Mm-hmm. And I think I have a good sense of humor. So I think, I can kind of filter and figure out what's working and not working. So maybe those are the things. But I tend to make my sets pleasant, because I think the creative comedic experience is much better when everyone is relaxed and comfortable, as opposed to tense and not happy. So maybe that's why.
Well, now who gets the last word? I'm asking both of you.
Well, it's always the showrunner.
Is it the showrunner?
Yeah.
Showrunner always does. But if you have a good relationship with the showrunner, like on 30 Rock, I had a great relationship with Tina and Robert Carlock. So they trusted my instincts a lot. And if it was something that they didn't think was going to work, they're like, no, we're not doing that, Beth. But I felt comfortable pitching them. Like when I go to a new show, like the first time I did a Modern Family, I kind of backed off and did what they, what I felt, we needed in the script. I didn't jump out and, give a bunch of ideas and stuff like that. But I think once I get comfortable on a show, and I usually do multiple episodes of the shows that I work on, I'll go, hey, how about if we shoot this kind of like this? Or would it be fun?
Well, that was a unique, Modern Family has a kind of different way of shooting their shows, didn't they?
They shoot, talk about
semi-documentary.
It's doc style. So it's 1-2 camera setup, and it's something that you have to get used to. And it also is something that you have to kind of figure out. You get laughs out of that style of directing, right. It's a little bit of different blocking when you're thinking about it. That's a nut, like Chris Lloyd and Steve Levitan. I mean, the people I've been able to work with, it's just nuts.
Well, no, what's the homework then? So let's say you want a Modern Family, you just watch show after show, you pick up consistent camera angles, styles, rack.
What
focus.
I normally do is, if it's a new show and it hasn't been on the air yet, or even if it is an established show, I usually ask the showrunner to send me their 3 favorite episodes, because that way they're usually sending me an episode that they liked the writing, they liked the acting, and they liked the camera work. So, and then you watch a show and you watch several episodes of it, and you kind of figure out, it took me a few episodes to figure out Modern Family, Ty can get a joke out of just doing a quick look to the lens, or,
right.
Maybe this joke will work better if the camera's just here and they go through frame, because you do 1-2 camera setup, lighting setup. And if someone comes in a door and it's over there, you swing the camera and go get the shot. And sometimes, like, swinging a camera and landing on something is a funnier joke than it coming into the lens, or,
that's true in Veep too.
I was just going to say, we had Brad Hall on the show, and he directed a Veep, of course, or a few Veeps, and he said the exact same thing. So Veep is similar in its format, right?
And Veep also, there is such a cohesiveness with, like, you don't even understand what Julia and Tony bring to their scenes that aren't even on the page. You know what I mean? All that karaoke stuff, and some of it's written, but some of it, you find on set. So I find that, like, rehearsals of some shows are, you rehearse once, maybe go through it a second time, and then you start lighting. But on a show like Veep, sometimes you spend a half an hour, kind of working the scene out and making sure everything's kind of flowing and working, and where we can add something, or,
that sounds like a really fun to me. That really sounds like playing in the sandbox.
Fun. It's so much fun.
That's what getting just to play in the sandbox and do that sounds great.
And, I mean, even just to sit and watch those comedic geniuses kind of.
So what other, I think I mentioned to you that I love doing just anecdotes without saying names and things like that.
Yeah.
Kenny likes
the
dirt
worst
too.
It's just, I think some people, they do like those kind of sensational stories. Like when one of the shows that I was doing, which I don't have to name, That's So Raven, I was doing this show, and in the middle, while we're doing a scene, all of a sudden there's screaming, hysterical screaming, and just crazy screaming. And the the mother of one of the kids comes out on the floor and starts screaming at Raven's father, who was on the set every day, standing right there. By the way, he considered himself the co-director because he would literally direct while she was performing. And she's a beautiful woman. Raven's
lovely.
Lovely.
I work with her on Blackish. She's lovely. Yeah,
she's a sweetheart. But her father was bizarre. Anyhow, they got into such a fighting match between the two because he had parked in her parking spot.
Ooh. Well, we all know about parking spots.
We all know about parking. And so the whole day was called off. And everybody was
Dad
home.
Parked in daughter's parking spot.
That's it.
And they got into it.
So that's kind of like a bad moment in my life. And
it reminds me very much of the last season of Curb with the father and the daughter in the show. And he sat in Larry's chair. So
right. Exactly. Yeah.
So funny. God, I've definitely had awful experiences. The first season, we had a host come who was terrible. And
come on, you can say who. Can you say who?
Been there several times. And he was really mean to the cast. They were all new, and he was really mean to them. He was really mean to me. He kept calling me Davy. And he was just really difficult and really awful. And it was like my third episode or my fourth episode. And I was like, God, do I really have to go through this? And one of the writers on the show, who's absolutely lovely and had been there for a while, was like, I'm going to tell you a story about him, and it's going to make you get through the rest of the weekend. I was like, wow. Okay. And he told me this great story about him where basically he was doing some things that were cut up in baby laxative, and he shit his pants in front of an audience and had to go back and change his clothes and then go back out and continue his show because he had shit his pants in front of a live audience. And it got me through the rest of the weekend. And every time he was a jerk to me, all in my head was like, you shit your pants in front of a bunch of people. So amazing. I don't really care how you feel about me.
I think I figured out who it is. And
you
we
know
don't
exactly
need to go any further
who it
than
is.
that. I do know who it is. And I've had, an uncomfortable experience with that person as well.
That person. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing, Beth.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Well, okay. So, but there's always, Robert Blake wiped his ass with my script. There are also great stories of
unbelievable.
People, you've shared plenty already, but of all the hosts going back to SNL, can you think of one that was just like, wow? For me, it was Ringo.
I love Ringo Starr.
You worked with Ringo on...
No, I never worked with him.
No, never worked with him?
Never worked with him.
Ringo gave me a drum lesson. I mean, told me stories about waiting for the curtain to open on the Ed Sullivan Show. And for a Beatle freak to hear that perspective.
Nuts, right?
And it was as kind as
yes,
could be.
I've worked with Sir Paul several times, and he's lovely as well. And it was funny because the first time I worked with him, we did an interview on MTV, and my friend Jenna Rossitano, who would fight you as being the biggest Beatle fan in the planet, she was freaking out. And I'm
take that as a challenge.
You guys should definitely
I'm going to win.
Wrestle it out. And after it, she's like, I just can't believe how nice he is. And I'm like, I know. I'm like, what does he have to be not nice about? He's a Beatle. He married the love of his life. He's got this fabulous family. What does he have to be a
$1 billion?
Well, that's what I always say. If I was a billionaire, I'd be the happiest person in the world.
He is the loveliest man in the world. He is lovely.
If I was rich and famous, you know how delightful I would be?
I know. So funny. I will say when somebody hosted, who I won't name, we had Michael Palin and John Cleese on the show, and they did the Dead Parrot sketch.
Yes.
And the whole cast sat up and watched them rehearse that. And we just watched it for hours. It was so heavenly and so cool. And I was like,
I never worked with Cleese, but I worked with Palin.
Oh.
And I played a young Mark Twain, and I'm learning everything from him as an old riverboat captain. And he was so funny, so kind, so generous, so patient.
Lovely.
He was a beetle. He was everything I wanted a python to be.
Yeah.
Those experiences.
Moments like that. And the 25th anniversary, 2 moments in the 25th anniversary. One was we're doing the cold open and it's Danny, Lorraine, Garrett, Billy, and who else? Forget who else. So Jane Curtin, who didn't do a lot of stuff with reunions and stuff, came by to see everybody. And we were in the middle of rehearsing and Billy goes, we have to mark this occasion. And he orders champagne from the Rainbow Room and brings it downstairs. And we're all sitting on the floor of 8H and toasting. And I'm sitting there with 3/4 of the original cast of Saturday Night Live and toasting with them and going, who the hell let me in the door? It was like bonkers.
Could you imagine if you had cell phones? Everybody would be doing selfies. That would be unbelievable.
I mean, it was just ridiculous that I was even allowed in that room at that moment. Like those kind of moments are just insane.
Your career is so illustrious. I pale in comparison, but and Kenny, you can say.
Well, I yelled at her, and I think that motivated her. Quite a lot.
But I look at my life as a pinch me. It's a pinch me life. Did I really get this experience? Did I really I met Sir Paul, but not your experience, but to work with Ringo and the things, it's pinch me. Me. Is this real? Well, in your pinch me life, can you talk about what you're doing right now?
I'm doing a show. So I started working I worked on the Kaminsky method and I met Chuck Lorre there. Talk about another.
Yeah, there you go.
Just like it just keeps coming. It's just nuts.
The people you don't have to think about shitting their pants.
It's just
those are the good people.
Nuts. So Chuck asked me to do a pilot for the show, and it's called Bob Hart's Abishola, and it stars Billy Gardell and Falaki Oluwafuneku. We have a lot of fabulous Nigerian actors on the show. It's about a guy who has a heart attack and falls in love with the Nigerian nurse that takes care of him, and it's the melding of these two families. And there are incredible actors on it.
So that's the show you're doing right now?
I do that. Yeah. And I've pretty much been doing that full time.
But we go back to the Kaminsky method? Because you're talking Michael Douglas and Alan
Arkin. God.
So I'm just curious how that was.
Nuts.
Are they great to work with? I mean, I worked with Michael Douglas.
Nuts. Michael Douglas is an absolute dreamboat. That guy is such a good actor, and he is so gracious, and he's wonderful on a set. And he's great on that show. And Alan Arkin, I mean,
my goodness,
nuts. And then Paul Reiser ended up playing like a big part in the last season. He was Michael Douglas's daughter's fiance and ends up marrying him. And I had a moment on that show which was bonkers. So one of my favorite movies is Diner. I mean, Barry Levinson is a genius. So it gets written in my episode. I only got to do one episode the last season because I was doing Bob Hart's Abishola and Chuck didn't want me away too long. So on my episode, Morgan Freeman was on it. Nuts. And then Barry Levinson played a role. Michael Douglas gets a part doing a remake of Old Man in the Sea. So I shoot this big movie scene with Michael Douglas playing, the old man, fighting the sharks, big CGI, big visual effects, and Barry Levinson's in the episode. And then Paul Reiser's on the show. So I'm on set with Paul Reiser, who you fall in love with in Diner. He's so amazing. And Barry Levinson. And it's like, this is nuts. Kaminsky is such a great special show. And also, Kathleen Turner, it was like a little reunion between Michael and Kathleen Turner.
I picked her nose.
That's pretty impressive. That's
my pinch me life.
I did not pick her nose when I worked with her, but I did get to work with her. And
was she incapable of picking her own nose?
It was a sketch where I was an old man who trimmed people's nose hairs in the lobby of a hotel. That's as much as we need to talk about right now.
All right, at least it was one of my clients. I didn't know whether or not
it was an SNL sketch.
She was a client of yours. I like.
She was a client of mine.
I just going back to directing. two questions that I don't know whether or not people are bored about them. Music is, I'm not musical. And I had to learn, as a matter of fact, my AD who taught me, who's Sarah De La O. I don't know if you know Sarah.
I don't.
She directs The View.
Oh,
she taught me how to do music.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know bars or anything like that. So she had a stopwatch. And that's how I did music.
Yeah.
How do you do music?
Well, it's kind of nuts. So at MTV, we didn't learn the counting measures. And also they count up, the old DGA method of. And the first time I AD'd a music show was for Scott Fishman. He was doing the La Bamba premiere party. Okay. And he had me do it with a stopwatch. Well, right. It was like Marshall Crenshaw, who plays never at the same pace ever. So nothing was on. So I just started counting bars of music.
Oh, you could do that.
Yeah, I'm very musically, I'm a huge music fan.
Okay.
I DJ'd all through college. I played piano growing up, but I'm not like,
Okay, because I had no clue how to do music until Sarah taught me. And when I say use a stopwatch, so people know, the song starts as soon as it's 30 seconds to the trombone, 15 seconds to the guitar, and
but the way they do it with counting measures, the way the old school way is like, it's like 4 to the 3 to the guitar, 2, 1, 2, 3 guitar. And I did it like guitar and 8, 7. So I would count bars, I would just count down 8s. And I started doing that a lot for Milt and Scott, and I started teaching all the ADs that direct.
Well, I got to tell you that your skill set is remarkable and very unique. I don't know any person who has the range of genres that you do.
Well, yeah.
Do you even know anybody that can do it?
Your friend who is a Beatle fan, right?
Yes.
She might watch this podcast, right?
Yes, Jenna, she might. Mm-hmm. Oh, she's going to be so.
It's a left-handed Hofner bass because close your eyes and I'll kiss you. I'm a left-hander. I'm a lefty.
Is that like Paul McCartney's?
That's Paul McCartney's bass.
This is a Beatle bass.
That's an absolute replica.
Yeah. It's an absolute replica. Doesn't the blood rush to your stomach? Yes, I'm a Beatle freak.
I got to tell you, there's a show that's on Amazon called Red Oaks. Have you seen it?
We had Richard Kind on.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So it's about, a country club in the mid 80s. Yeah. It's really great. I would suggest you watch it if you.
No, absolutely. I did one. My daughter absolutely loves the show.
But the series finale was so great. And they used Ringo's song Photograph as like the finale song. It was so great. It was such a great finale song.
Oh, yeah.
It was so good.
Mm. Well, Gary, you got to tell Richard Kind what Beth said, because
I will.
Very happy.
I will tell Richard when I speak to him. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll get on the phone with Richard.
I love that show, and they'd asked me to do it.
I think you are marvelous. I'm doing Richard, if you can't tell.
I've never worked with him, but I love him, and I loved that show. And they had called me to do an episode, but I was going to have to go back to the East Coast, and I was out here, and it just didn't work out, and I never saw it. And then I watch it, I'm like, God damn it, why didn't I do that show? Like, there's certain shows that I'm like, oh, I wish I did an episode. Like, I tried to call and see if I could get an episode of Schitt's Creek.
Oh yeah,
found it and fell in love with it. But it was like their last 2 seasons, and they had all their directors, and like Ted Lasso, I would do tomorrow.
Sure. I've been watching The Righteous Gemstones. Have you seen it?
Oh, I haven't. Do you like it?
I do.
It's John Goodman. It's Danny.
It'd be great. Yeah. And Danny McBride is so talented.
And isn't Adam in that too? Adam, oh my God. I love him. I'm having a total brain fart. I work with him on Modern Family, and I love him. Yeah. That's a good show.
Yeah. You should check that out. You'd be marvelous for that show.
I just watched Afterlife. Have you watched that?
Yes. This is season 3.
Is that
this is season 3?
And
you haven't seen it previously?
I had never seen it. I watched the whole thing.
I
had COVID. I binged the whole thing.
Oh yeah.
It's only 6 episodes, 3 seasons. Oh my God.
He's so great.
He's a genius.
Best thing he's ever done.
Yeah, I'm going to look that up.
Well, for me, it's extras. Although this is so much
Extras is great.
Relevant.
The Office is
poignant.
great. This just has.
This has depth.
Oh my
uncanny.
God!
I know.
You're
so
like.
Last question from me. Are you going to go another 25 years? Do you direct till you're dead? I mean, I don't see any sign of you saying,
I'm going to be directing when I'm dead. Gary, what kind of question?
I don't see any sign of you saying I'm going to retire.
No, you know what I'm going to do? My son graduates from high school next year. We're going to move back to the East Coast. And then I'm going to work for pleasure only and, not probably work as much and, spend a little more free time. But I don't know when I would stop directing. I love it. I love it.
You could just
she's in a position that, where she can pick and choose, which is very nice. But there's a lot of, the life of a lot of directors, and it's changed dramatically because of everything that's going on.
Yeah.
And the opportunities have become less and less for a lot of people is they get whatever show they can get.
Yes.
And she can pick the people that she wants to work with, which is fantastic. But there are those instances, and I've been there, where you walk in and everybody hates you. You don't realize that the AD who you're working with was promised an episode on the show and you got it.
Yeah.
And they want you out. Or the DP was promised to direct and he's going to do everything to jeopardize.
But I've had that. I have that. And I've had that happen in recent years too. It is, I always used to hate, there was one show I went on several times and I would always get the episode after the DP directed. And he'd be so mad he was DPing again. And he'd just treat me like garbage for like 3 days. And then I'd win him over. But, it's such a great thing to be able to make, and especially in television right now. TV is like such a great place to be working right now.
Isn't that interesting?
Isn't that interesting? Has this show been a 40-year healing for you from Ken being kind of an asshole boss?
It's not an asshole boss. Host? I was just laughing about the fact that I was like somebody's assistant.
I just love Kenny getting mad.
He wasn't mad. He was just like,
Kenny's so nice. I just love the thought that he was impatient.
Great. How lucky was I that was my first boss?
You're very look. You're lucky. Kenny's lucky. I'm lucky to know Kenny and to meet you, Beth. We're going to let you go back to your life.
Yeah, you're
we're going to let
Beth.
you go back.
Pleasure.
To your life.
It was so good.
Touch. I'd love to go out in real life.
Yeah, that would be great.
You guys are on the same coast. Come here. Do you want to know what the temperature is here in Iowa?
What?
-9.
Oh, you're in Iowa.
-9.
Oh, yeah.
I'm in Iowa.
Oh, yeah.
That's not even with the wind. The wind chill, it's -100.
I don't understand history where pioneers were going across the country.
The wagon wheel broke down.
And they had a bad winter. And they said, we're staying.
Stuffing, we're staying.
No, the wagon wheel broke down and no one was smart enough to fix it. And they said, well,
but the Higgins boys and Andrew Steele, all those guys from Iowa. There's funny in the water in Iowa, Gary.
That's true. Look, Iowa is.
I'm here.
That's hilarious water that you're drinking.
Yeah. When it melts,
it
will be. Yes. Thank you, Beth. Thank you so much.
It was so great to see you guys.
Such a pleasure.
You too, Beth. Thanks
again.
Bye-bye.